This is an advanced video on fixing cropping problems with inside the Divi Slider. We're going to be using Photoshop as well as Lightroom in this tutorial. If you don't have Photoshop, you can use other editing tools, but ILGM is a big proponent of Photoshop products, and for $14.95 a month, you can't go wrong with these two tools. 90% of what we do is all edited with inside of the catalog here. I'll link a video up for that. One of the tools in this video is Photoshop, but we're going to be using grid images. What these grid images are, we're going to upload them to the website just like they're a normal slide image. And then when it gets displayed through its rotation, it's going to show us the top and the bottom using these numbers. And we'll have an idea of how wide and how tall and how low the actual window is for the slide, and you'll see what that is here when we start editing. This is a full-size image. Some of you guys have large sliders, and I have a narrow image for those that have narrow slider images. These will both be linked down in the bottom in the description so that you can download them and use them for free. But again, we're going to upload these to our website as a new slide. We're going to watch it in rotation, and we're going to learn where our top and our bottoms and our sides are being cropped off at. What's happening is that the system is going to fill this area with the information that it can and that it has. So we have to create a buffer on top and a buffer on the bottom, because it's always going to try and put in the width of the image. And you can see that by, if we scroll these differently, how that image grows and shrinks. That's very common. Now, if we take a look at the grid itself right here, what this is showing you is the viewable space that a browser is going to try and display based on the viewport. So right now, here's your center. You've got 1 to 3 down. You've got 14 to 12 up. But if I change this to a little bit smaller, it's going to try and hold it, but it's not buffering very much. So we need to pay attention to what 12 is and what 3 is. Even if I go a little bit bigger, it's still allowing 12 and 3 to be viewable. So what that means is that I have to have an image that between 12 and 3 are going to be visible. Now you're going to ask yourself, well, how do we do that? Good question. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump over to Photoshop. So we have the grid here in Photoshop. The reason I use Photoshop is because Photoshop has a ton of powerful tools, including layers and actions and things like that. But in all honesty, in 30 years, I only use about 10% of them. I use Adobe Lightroom, which we'll talk about in a second, to do 99% of all my editing. But when it comes to layers, I need to be in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a grid line down to where the 12 is. I'm going to drag a grid line down to where the 3 is, right there. So it doesn't matter how tall my image is or how wide it is. The viewable area is going to be between 12 and 3. So now I'm going to come over to one of the photos. We're going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to paste it on top of our grid. And you'll see over here that we're going to have another layer. So now it's on top of the grid. So as you can see here, this image is going to show between these two blue lines. So if I want, I can come over here and I can drag it up just a little bit to make sure that all the horses' heads and feet are inside the gray line. We don't care about what's happening down here or what's happening up here. And we can see that we're within there because when we turn this layer off, our blue line, our grid line, is right there on the 12 and on the 3. Now, we don't want to get it too close to either one of the lines, because as you saw, it is going to give a little bit on the top and the bottom. So there's our first image. Now let's see how this is going to work. So I'm going to come over here, and we're going to go ahead and save this image. And yes, we can see part of the grid there, but we won't see it online. So we're going to come back over to the back end of the system, and we'll take a look at this image real quick. So as you can see here, the image does have part of the grid line down there, but again, we don't care because it's only going to show what's in the window right there. Now you can fix that if you want to. There's all kinds of ways in Photoshop you can, but it's not a step that's necessary. We'll come over here to the full width slider. Don't edit this one. This is the one that was there before. We'll click on the gear. We'll go to the first slide, or the second slide, I'm sorry. The first slide is your grid. We'll go to the second slide. We're going to scroll down to background. We're going to click on the background tab. And again, this is all inside the video that I was talking about earlier. So we'll go ahead and click on the image, and we'll drag and drop the test one image into the top. So there it is. We have it selected. We're going to say upload. We're going to click the OK button and update. So now let's go back to the home page. Let's go ahead and hit reload. There's our grid and there's our horses. And as you can see, everything fits in there. So if I make it a little bit too small, you can see part of it. So it might be a good idea to go ahead and clip that off. But you can actually see what it is that we're talking about. And again, and the reason I didn't do that in the beginning is because I wanted to show you this step. Again, Photoshop is going to come to the rescue for us on this. So we're going to come down here. We're going to use the select box, and we're going to select that grid line down there. So we have it all selected. Then we're going to come up to Photoshop, and we're going to go to Edit, and we're going to go to Content Aware Fill. And it's going to show us this is what it's using, and this is how it filled it. So we're going to say OK. And now you can see that Photoshop filled in everything down on the bottom to match what the rest of the photo was. And if we wanted to, we could even take a little extra time and kind of clean it up just a little bit so it looks a little bit more natural. Not that anybody would really notice, but somebody who's doing editing might. So we can come in here and remove some of these spots using the spot removal tool. So now we have that image there. So we're going to go ahead and hit save again. Come down here and we'll say test 1A. For this image, we'll go back to our page, back to our slider. We'll go back to the second image, and we'll go down to background, tab, upload, and put test 1A in, and hit upload image. Save, and update. So we'll come back over here and hit reload. And now we have the horses in there. Everything's lined out. So if we go really big, we're fine. If we go really small, you can see we're fine again, even down to the level of what a phone would be. But the other issue is here. So the key here is the way that your original images are cropped and how the original images are laid out on top of the grid. So we'll take a look right here and I'll show you what I mean. And then again, this is a Photoshop thing. So we've got this layer right here. Let's tone down the transparency a little bit so that we can actually see how it's all going to lay out on top of the image and the grid. And again, this is the power of Photoshop. And as a webmaster, you're only going to use about 10% of what Photoshop can do. And there's a bazillion videos online on how to use it. But the very basics are going to be just some modification, some cleanups, and things like that. So as you can see, if we have an image that's already cropped too small, like we have here on this image here, we'll copy it. And we come over and we add it to the grid. It's going to crop right here. It's going to crop it every single time. So how do we do that? Well, we can shrink it some. But if we shrink it some so that it'll actually fit in the crop line, then we have a problem with how it lines up on the grid on the sides. And let me make this a little easier for you so you can see it. Let's crop it to the dead center. So we'll come over here So we know that's the viewable area. And if we leave it that way, then we're going to have issues on either side. So the key is not having cropped images. You want to shrink them down to a particular size so that they will fit, but you don't necessarily want to crop them yet. And let me show you an example. Okay, so let's take a look at this alligator. This is a typical scene of a photo that you're going to get off of an iPhone or a DSLR or something like that. But what's important in this scene is what's happening with the alligator and even the reflection down here on the bottom. So this is not exactly centered, but this photo hasn't been cropped yet. So we have a lot of room here to work. Let's take this and put it inside of our template and see what we have. So if I copy this, I come over here, I add another layer, by pasting it in. It is now too big. So I'm going to select the whole image. You can see the lines that are there. And again, this is not meant to be a Photoshop tutorial. We can talk about that later. This is actually meant to be a slider tutorial because this can be done in a ton of different image editors. But now that we have it shrunk so the sides fit, we'll go ahead and open that up so that we can view it. We can see our alligators down here at the bottom. So the first thing we want to do is we want to drag that up to the top so that it fits with inside our parameters right here. So we have our top and our bottom. And in this particular case, we're not going to be able to use so much of the shadow, but that's okay. So now if we take and we save this image, we know that this is going to be visible. But if it was already cropped here and then saved at a particular size like we saw in that race rider on top of that horse, we're kind of screwed because we don't really have any room to make this any bigger or smaller. So it's important that you start with the full-size image. Now, not always do we have full-size images. If you have a particular image that you need to have the original. And this is where Adobe Lightroom comes into play. So Adobe Lightroom is a cataloging application. So right now there's 11,000 images inside here. I have the ability to search for text, like what would be inside the text over here. You can have keywords and descriptions. I can search based on stars, colors, and a variety of other things. But right now, this gives me the ability to see the alligators that are in here. And this one, as you can tell, has already been tagged and colored. But Adobe Lightroom is a lot more than just a cataloger. And like I said, I have another video that I'll send along a link to that gets into this in depth. But 99% of all my editing happen here. And I'll explain why this is important, why the crop is important, and how we resolve that. So every image that I get, whether it's an image that I shot or an image that I've gotten from a client or wherever it came from, automatically goes into Adobe Lightroom, and it is cataloged first off just by straight up folders. But when it comes to what do we do with this image, we now have control over what all is happening, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's get out of here. Let's just go find that general generic image. So we'll just scroll up here to let's take this image. This will be dramatic. So we have this image here. I'm going to reset it by going to the develop module, hit reset. So this is what the original image looks like. So we have some darks here. The blue's not very high. This is not very green. So all of my editing happens inside here. And what I do is I go to the development tool. The first thing you do is you start off is you click auto and you let Adobe think what it needs to be, which this picture looks a little bit better, and that's okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to bump up the colors just a little bit by coming down to the saturation tab and bring in some color, as you can see here. Now I have some dark shadows here, I have some dark shadows there, so I'm going to go ahead and bump up the highlights on the shadows. So now I have a little bit more clearer image, but I have some haze and stuff here. So I'm going to add a little bit of clarity to it, and then I'm going to remove some of that haze, and now I have a workable image. And it was just as simple as moving a few sliders around. Now, if there's something in the image, like let's say you don't want this spot right here, you can go to the eraser tool and you can get rid of that spot. So now it's gone. And it'll work with a variety of different things. And now it's gone. And I'll show you a much broader example. Come back over to our library. Let's say that we don't want these solar panels inside here. We want to get rid of those solar panels. Come over to the eraser tool. We come over here, we mask out the solar panels just by dragging, and we let it do its thing. Now the solar panels are gone. So this is a great way to edit out a lot of the trash that may be inside of your image so that you can get a good image. Now, how does this correlate back to what we were talking about a second ago when it comes to cropping and whether or not we have an image that we can use? So Adobe Lightroom is what's called a non-destructive editor, which means that all of these changes that we're doing are happening in what's called a sidecar file, so that way we can reset everything back. And what makes this important is I can come over to the crop tool now, and I can change my crop so that I can use it a little bit more, and I can crop the image, and then I can export this to my desktop. But the original is still inside of Adobe Lightroom. So if I come over here and come back to the crop tool, you can see the original is still there. And that goes for a lot of different things too. If you have something that is in focus and that's important to you, and you want to use it, let's say on Instagram, we can come over to the library. Let's say we got this backpacker here. We'll come up to the develop tool, and let's say that we want a square image of this. We can come over to the crop tool. We can come to the aspect ratio, hit square. So there's the image. We can line it up. We can make it a little bit smaller. Keep in with our rule of thirds and hit go. So now I have an image I can send over to Instagram that's already cropped and ready to go. But if I need this image again, let's say I want to use it for the header that we're talking about, I can come over to the crop tool, and you can see all of the images still there. So I can first come back to here, put it back to as shot, and then I can come over here and I can drag it smaller so that it fits inside of our grid. And then from here, I can just go ahead and export it, and I can export it to the size that I need. I can come back to our alligator, and we're going to drop it right inside here, and we're going to make it a little bit bigger. And now we have an image that fits. Now it's cutting off the legs a little bit, but you get the idea here and the point. So it's important to have good editing tools, because at the end of the day, what's important on the website is this grid and the fact that we stay inside the timelines here. I know that was a lot, but having good tools is the key to making this a lot more simple. These products are available on Adobe. Just head over to adobe.com and go ahead and click on the photographer right here, plans, and I believe they are $14.95. It looks like they're running a sale. They're always running some kind of a sales. So right now it is, it's $14.98. So it's $15 a month to get both Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop. And just so that you know, you also get the mobile versions of these. So if you have tablets, you can manipulate on your phone, tablets, as well as your desktop. I think it's a good move if you could go ahead and give it a shot, even if it's just for 1 month. Just give it a try. There's a ton of tutorial videos out on the internet of these programs, but I have another video that's more in depth on Adobe Lightroom. I'll put it up here in the top right hand corner for you. If you have any questions, as always, just shoot me a ticket and I'll do the best that I can to answer them.